Hey guys, welcome to the Seeds to Healing podcast. We're talking about mental health and giving tips and tricks and adding a Christian perspective. I'm Allie.
I'm Ayana. We're so excited that you're here listening to this week's episode.
Welcome back to another episode of Seeds to Healing. Me and Ayana are back, dynamic duo in the house. I wish
It
we had
almost
sound
feels
effects.
that would be it. The brr, 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 brr. I feel it. I feel it. I'm excited to be back. Solo podcast by myself are not as fun, obvi. So I'm glad
Yeah, I
Allie's
missed
back.
my soundboard buddy.
Don't worry, I got you. Sound effects on lock. But today I'm excited because we have a special guest, right, Allie?
Yes, we do. I'm excited for this one. I can't wait to nerd out, y'all.
No doubt. I'm so excited. If nobody else enjoys this podcast, we will, but I know
For
that
sure.
everybody will. We have a special guest today. Our guest is Brian Dunn. Brian Dunn is a motivator, counselor, and discipler. He became a youth pastor at New Day Christian Fellowship in 2014, as well as earning a master's degree in both biblical counseling and marriage and family therapy the same year. In 2020, he became a licensed MFT and started the Real Therapy Center as a center for young men and women seeking help to win life with the real peace and purpose. Brian Dunn creatively shares love, hope, and faith with everyone he encounters. He has been married for 6 years to his wife, Ebony, and they have a 10-month-old son, Kyrie. Welcome. I want to call you Pastor Brian because that's just how I know you.
I was just gonna say that. I was like, I cannot call him Pastor Brian.
Oh gosh. Brian is just fine, especially in a setting like this. But some people call me Pastor, some people call me Mister. Yeah, but it's all good.
Got it.
All right. We're gonna try and not say it, but we're probably gonna say Pastor Brian. But welcome, Brian. We are so glad to have you.
Yeah, exciting. This is cool. Yeah, I've been liking what I've been hearing so far. So excited I get to be a part of Seeds to Healing.
We're excited to have you.
Absolutely.
You definitely are. So before we start, why don't you go ahead and just give us a little feedback. I know we did your little introduction, but I'm interested to hear what got you interested in the field of mental health.
Sure. Yeah. Oh man. I would say this probably has a lot to do with how many therapists and counselors are. It goes back to childhood for sure for me. I was that guy who was the one people would go to, they would have a problem or something, and I guess something on my face or something how I listened. People would just kind of share and talk to me about their problems or what's happening. And my parents remind me that even when I was younger, I had this kind of leadership kind of attitude that I always seem to want to rally people together or do something, make people feel better, or just stuff like that. And so, to be really honest, I kind of always wanted to be a writer when I was younger. That was like my goal. I was going to major in English. I was going to be a writer. And then one day, my high school teacher told me that you're going to have to be reading like 100 something books to really get through college and go. And I was like, look, I like to read and all, but that's too much. That's too much. And one of my kind of wild friends was like, why don't you do psychology? Because you're always talking about people in the mind. And I was like, huh, maybe I could do that. And I started at UC Riverside. That's where I went to college. Uh, what were we? We were Highlanders. I still don't know what that is, but that's what we were. So go Highlanders. But
Go Highlanders.
yeah. But I was one of the rare ones because I started psychology as my major in college, and I actually finished with psychology with my degree. Like they say, people change like 2 to 3 times or so in college on average. So I don't know. I went through it. I liked it and kept going, and then I took a quick break. And then 2 years later, I decided to go back to school and keep going with psychology to actually be like a therapist. So
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
I too went all the way through for psychology.
Did you? Okay.
Yes, I got my associates in, I did all of them for no reason. Well, there's a reason, but my associates in psychology, my bachelor's is in psychology. But then of course I veered off just a tad into social work. So
Social work.
yeah, so I can share in that sentiment with you of going all the way through, and that's really awesome. I know that this is, I don't know if A knew this. I think she did, but I actually just found out about you having because you are a licensed marriage and family, correct?
Yeah.
I had just found that out right before we went up to camp. And so I was like, oh my gosh. Hey, guess what? And I was like, I think I want him to come on for an episode. I think she knew. Did you know
Yeah,
that already?
I definitely did.
Yeah, see, I did
Like, wow,
it. And
Allie's
so
late to the game.
per usual, per
No,
usual.
yeah. I mean, I found out you, Ayana, were, into counseling. You were finishing your degree, you were getting your license. So that's how I
Mhm.
definitely was like, oh, shoot, because not too many people really understand what it's like, especially
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
Yep.
When you do find somebody, it's like, oh, my people, you know,
Yeah.
That is legit how I felt. I was like, he understands. He
yeah,
gets it. He gets
Oh
it.
yeah,
yeah. It's the inner circle for sure.
Even
yeah.
if it's just the three of us.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that many of you listeners don't know this, but when we bring a guest on, a lot of the times we do shoot it their way for them to pick a topic, and or we'll pick topics for them to
Mhm.
speak on. And I was grateful enough to have had coordinated with Brian about topics, and I believe that he came up with a really good topic that we're going to touch on today. Brian, why don't you go ahead and let them know the topic that came to your mind that you felt was important to talk about?
Sure, yeah. When I was coming up as a therapist, I was told to learn everything as much as you
Mhm.
can. And I did, but what I was not prepared for was running group therapy. So when I was
Mhm.
still in school during my traineeship, I had to learn a couple things out in the field. And I was first tasked with running a group therapy for anger management. And it was for those who, well, you didn't need to require anger management to be part of this group, but for those who were mandated to be a part of it, they could be part of this group. And of course, it was me, still in school, still learning. And I had no idea. I don't really think I'm like an angry person. So I was going in thinking, okay, I'm going to just do what I know and how to help. And I did that for a year and I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. Weird. Wouldn't have been something I picked, but I really liked it and seeing the transformation. And then as I continue to grow as a therapist, just understanding emotions overall and really growing in that. So today, I guess we're talking about anger management and emotional management. Yeah.
We definitely are. And I think it's also just interesting, and I would be interested to know what you observed in those groups. I know there's certain confidentialities you can't really share, but I'd be interested to know like the demographic of like, was it more male, female, heavy? What were some of the things that were your takeaways that really impressed upon you that, that made you fall in love with like teaching anger management and emotional regulation?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, when I started, I mean, I'm 36 years old today. When I started with that, I was 20 24,
20
25, somewhere about there. Yeah. So we're going on 10 years now. And to be very honest, I felt young,
Mm-hmm.
especially in an environment like that, because pretty much those who came to the anger management group, to be clear, I didn't run an emotional management group. It was particularly on anger management. So for this particular time, when I did the anger management, um, yeah, my God, we had some really hardened people who were in this group. We probably saw anywhere between 8 to 14 people attend on these Monday night groups. And I probably saw maybe as old as 60 years old who are some of these members, but most people
Mm,
probably in their 40s, probably about their
okay.
40s, maybe some 50. I think one or two probably 30s, a little younger. But the story was all really similar for a lot of them. Their families, their jobs, or their environment, like the people they know, their friends, wherever they would go, they would say, you need some help. And almost
Mm-hmm.
every time I would hear, I don't have an anger problem. This is just
Mm,
me. This is just who I am.
mm,
So almost everybody who was there, which about 90% were males, they were there because someone really told them they ought to go, but they didn't really see why they needed to be there.
mm,
And for the few that did understand that they had some issues, this was because they had probably either put somebody in the hospital, they had hit someone with their car, they had um, yeah, they've taken some lives. So it was a very interesting group. So it made me feel very young, uh,
mm,
but confident in the fact that, if I went to school and I'm learning this and I have a pretty good idea of how people work and emotions, then I do think I can speak on it. And I sure did with confidence. And man, I remember really enjoying that group. And it really did seem like the people who were there enjoyed that group. I think
Mm-hmm.
especially because they kept coming back. So,
Which
yeah,
you always want as a group therapist or leader, you want them to
you
come
were.
back for
Yeah.
sure.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything that comes up, hey, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I love the story because it's similar to mine.
Is
My
it?
second, yeah,
Huh?
my second go around for internship was doing an anger management class in the jails in San Bernardino,
Look at
and I
that.
just remember feeling the same way as in like there are a bunch of older gentlemen, and I did a course with women, and they're older, so they're looking at you, and then we did a parenting class at the same time or at different times but on the same day, and so they'd be like, well, do you have any kids, or you don't know anything about life, and I'm here like having these conversations. So I was like, not
Yeah.
only am I
Yeah.
short, now I'm feeling super young. So it
A
was
real team.
crazy, but it was also like so rewarding just to go through that journey with them, to see the light bulbs click on, and I think that's what fueled my love for emotions and talking about them all the time. So I'm stoked for this.
Yeah, yeah, there it is. Exactly, exactly. So it's a lot of fun. I think when you enjoy it and then you're seeing the effect, the fruit come from it. So
Oh
uh,
yeah,
yeah,
that's for sure.
I was seeing that.
And I think it's funny that this was the topic that got brought up because I believe it was our first or second, it was our second, like our first actual episode, but technically our second episode. And that's pretty much a little bit of what A had talked about. She was like really big on emotions. And so when you had picked that as a topic, I was like, oh, A's gonna love this. He's gonna eat this all up. So yeah, I love the similarities, love it all. So first question is for our listeners. I know it may seem maybe obvious, maybe not. What would you define anger management as, and also similar emotional management? How would you define those?
Yeah, honestly, we are emotional people. I believe we're created with emotions, and so it is a natural thing.
Mhm.
But managing them, especially anger, is so important, in my opinion, to really be mature, to be someone that is emotionally intelligent. I think all of us do better in life when we're self-aware. And so when we are more aware of what's actually happening on the inside with our emotions and we're able to control it, we can do better. We can live better. And so I would define anger management and emotional management as being able to recognize and understand what you're feeling and be able to isolate it from maybe what you're thinking and then what you're doing.
Mm,
Many, they blur these ideas together, but if you can think one thing and act another way, but then still feel what you feel and control it, then I would say that is a proper way of managing it. Because our feelings are real, they're valid, but they shouldn't impede on our thoughts and they shouldn't impede on our actions. We should be able to rationally decide every time what we want to do.
that's really good. And I think you may have I understood what you're saying, but you said a key term there that I would like for you to clarify what it
Okay.
means for our listeners. You said emotional intelligence.
Mm,
How could you clarify that for our listeners? Because I
yeah,
know A knows, but what does that mean?
sure, sure. Because I think most of us get pretty familiar with IQ, our
Mm-hmm.
general kind of intelligence in that
Mm-hmm.
way. But EQ, emotional intelligence, is really being aware of what exactly is going on inside, what you're feeling, and then how does that relate to what you're doing. So people who are emotionally intelligent are people who can quickly identify what they are feeling and then also why they're feeling that.
Mm-hmm.
For those who can't necessarily identify that, I mean, I've worked with a number of people, especially young people, who say, "Well, I don't know, this is just how I feel. This is just me. This is just how I act. Just don't get me pissed. Like just don't because you don't know what's coming." Like the emotional intelligence is kind of low when you hear things like that because there's not an evidence of maybe what's actually happening within you. There's a
Mm-hmm.
blur of what's happening inside and the environment around you, and it's two different things. What you're doing, how you're feeling, is very separate from what's happening around you.
Hmm. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Um, so essentially, a person who, from what you're saying, is a person who's able to manage their emotions and their emotion like anger well,
Mm,
typically would have a higher or more increased emotional intelligence.
yeah. I mean,
Got it.
there's layers to emotional intelligence for sure,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but managing emotions and not letting it manage you is
Mm.
definitely evidence of someone w's emotionally intelligent. Yeah.
Hmm. That was a good. That was he preaching. Did you guys catch that
Oh,
bar?
oh.
That was a good one.
Little oil right there. Okay.
That was a word. I needed that. Uh, hey, do you have anything before I move on to the second question?
No, I think that that's so good. And then also the clarification is also nice because I think sometimes people just get used to us using these words so they think they understand. So to be
Mm-hmm.
able to break it down to like a basic language of no, this is what it is, like the simple statement to sit and everybody can really ponder and think about is like, do I allow my emotions to run me or do I run my emotions? Because I
Mm,
feel like so many times, I mean, obviously things happen and our emotions take over and we are not always in a spot to use our coping skills or stop and think, and then there's sometimes where it's little things and we allow it to roll over. So even pondering on that, like how well do I handle my emotions, how well do I allow my emotions to run me, my life, my actions, is such a good thing. I mean, we could sit on that nugget all day, but
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was just gonna add too, like I feel like emotional intelligence is relatively, I think, a newer term
Yes.
mm,
that has come to the surface, definitely in our field, but just in general. And
mhm.
so I think that being able to break things like that down, anger management, I feel like it's been around for a while. Emotional management and emotional intelligence, I think, has been more of a newer terminology that's coming to the surface, and I think people really just need to know about it and know what can I do to increase it, what can I do
Yeah.
to build the tolerance. All of those things I think are needed for sure.
I
Yeah.
just want to
um
add,
Go ahead.
sorry, before you go on to all of our listeners, if you find an anger management course near you and people have taken it, I highly suggest, whether you think you have anger problems or not, to take it because teaching it, like we had to take it ourselves and then teach it. Taking it myself, I was like, wow, I must be really like crazy, because it really breaks down not only anger but like how emotions work and how we can have better hold of that. And I think that as a whole, that's something that everybody should be aware of, should know. It also creates more empathy for people because when you understand, especially when we look at anger, anger is such a secondary emotion. So when you can understand that like there's a lot under their little iceberg,
Mm-hmm.
like there's a lot going on down there, it gives you so much more empathy for people. When they blow up over nothing, you're like, wow, somebody really hurt you, So everybody take an anger management class.
Yeah. A
You
hundred
know.
percent. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. You don't know until you take the time to really observe and dig in. Yeah. So
Oh yeah. That's for sure. And I'm glad that you said anger is a secondary emotion, because when I learned that, I was telling everybody about it, because I was like, you can't tell me nothing. Yes, anger can be anger sometimes, but a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the times there's something below the surface that, even if it's frustration, I think that's another thing, right? That's emotional intelligence, understanding that frustration is different than anger. Oh my God, I'm nerding out. I can't.
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
it's things like that. Like we have been wired to just, anger's anger, frustration is frustration, but like no, frustration can cause anger. Like that's
Yeah.
I had a field day with that when I learned that anger was a secondary emotion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because I mean, for those listening, like we do get upset, and
Hmm.
maybe you could even say we get mad, but anger, yeah, it's not something as instinctive. There's layers to it. And yeah,
Mhm.
we can definitely keep breaking it down as we keep going. But yeah, sure. Yeah, you're on it. You're right. You're right.
We should ding every time. Oh, this is where we need to sound it, because every time he says anger, I just want to ding, ding, keep a tally of how many times we use the word anger and emotion in this episode.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I think it's actually a great segue, talking about how it's becoming more new, and people just aren't as aware of these things. To speak about what you feel are barriers for people, um, that you feel that people, particularly maybe you've worked with or you saw in the group, um, that you've encountered, are common barriers for people when it comes to like anger management or emotional management.
It is hard for people to look inside and kind of see patterns for themselves.
Mhm.
So, kind of as I was sharing about going into the therapy group, for those who were going, most of them were there because they were pretty much told, like, by the people close to them that they ought to go. And now, mind you, I guess for our listeners, if if your family has this opinion about you and your friends have the same opinion about you and your coworkers have the same opinion about you and it just keeps showing up, there's a good chance that maybe they're seeing something if
Mhm.
you don't necessarily see that. Maybe there's actually something going on. And so when it comes to barriers, we really have to take the time to recognize what might actually be going on. And it can be hard to do that, particularly maybe if, there's trauma that's been experienced by a person.
Mhm.
That could definitely be a real barrier for some people because when trauma occurs, people can almost get stuck in certain spots. And
Mhm.
depending on what happens around that, we can get emotionally paralyzed. We can have arrested development, and we just kind of get these different kind of ideas or fixations about things. And so, self-awareness can be a little low. So, for those who have experienced trauma or some kind of repeated trauma, that can definitely be difficult. So, there's kind of that.
Mhm.
Uh, Culturally speaking, I mean, shoot. You want to dive there,
Go ahead, say
especially
it. Go
minorities,
ahead, say it, Brian.
when it comes to recognizing when people need help.
Mhm.
I mean, if you talk about getting help, then I think you crazy.
Mhm.
No,
Yep.
I'm not crazy. I don't need help. That's either just who I am, or that's just the way it is, or that's how you saw mama do it, or daddy do it, or or seeing somebody who's a professional. I ain't paying somebody to tell me any problems or tell me what's
Mhm.
going on or this and that. But the influence of people can often really be the thing that keeps us from reaching some level of purpose or some level of fulfillment.
Mhm.
We can be really wary of what people say and their opinions of us, being vulnerable, what people are going to say or respond or react to us. Those are some real things that, especially young adults trying to navigate life, it can be hard to do that. And if the people close to you aren't a believer in your desire to, get better, to grow, you could definitely find yourself in repeated patterns and feeling stuck and just acting like, well, I guess this is life or this is just who I am, or this is just how it is. It's very easy to get trapped in people's opinions and their thoughts.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And I found it very interesting the first point on like trauma everything over here. So you mentioned my trigger word, my happy word.
Mm,
So
okay.
you mentioned how trauma can leave someone feeling stuck, and then you mentioned arrested development. I'm gonna have you define a lot today.
Sure. I know I'm throwing
No,
these
you're
out.
good. I love it for us, but I always love it for our people. It's good information to learn.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Arrested
Yeah.
development.
Yeah. I've worked with a older woman before who's probably in her 50s, and but talking to her and really just kind of understanding where she's at, it felt like I was talking to someone who was like 17, 18,
Mm,
Mm.
in her 50s, but it was like she just kind of had this really youthful vibe to her, and what was important to her, the things that she would watch. Even some of her peers, her friends that she would hang around with, they were like in their 20s.
mm,
And I kind of mentioned about that, just, what was that about? And come to find out that around that time of her life, when she was younger, she had a serious, serious trauma happen to her. So
mhm,
much so that, it, when talking about it, she would actually say that it feels like that happened just like last week.
mm,
Mm.
Mind you, this is years and years later, but her development, her emotional development, in my perspective, got arrested at that moment, to where now that eclipsed just the remainder of her life, to where she just feels and thinks and sees in that stage of her life.
mm,
And where you are at 18, 19, in my opinion, in this Western society, shouldn't really look anything like you're in your 50s. It's kind of a different
Mhm.
era of your life.
mhm,
But if it feels kind of like that, it's possible that there could have been something that really kind of halted your ability to emotionally mature into the usual trend going into the 40s and 50s in that age. And so for some people, if something happens to them or how they perceive it, they can almost get emotionally kind of stuck at that point. And so their development, as it should go, kind of pauses right there. And
mm.
really is only picked up when that's resolved, whatever may have
Oh,
been around that time of life.
that's good. And I think one could also see how that could influence things like anger management as well, right? Like, because I'm
Mm,
familiar with that. It's people could get stunted at like something traumatic could happen to them at 16, and they're now in their 20s and 30s having full blown like tantrums when something doesn't go their way, simply because they're still reverting back to like a 16-year-old type of mindset.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I think that that's such like when you actually sit and think about it is so interesting and to be able to put the parallels together. I think one of the reasons why I love this so much is because one, it helps give answers to individuals who don't understand and then also or who struggle with it and may not understand why or feel seen, right? Having these conversations. And then I also feel like for the other people, it just gives more empathy. Like the idea that a older woman can be stuck in her 20s because something so traumatic happened that her like she can't process through it to continue with the typical aging process. I think allows so many more people to have more empathy to really stop and think like, what are people going through? Because people are out here going through a lot.
It's so
Mm-hmm.
true. And one more barrier I would say is for some people, their resources may be low. They
Mm,
may not have the people who can guide them to recognize that you may honestly need some help, or that the people in their life may just be affirming of where they're at and just like, you're fine, you're fine. And so while some people may limit it, some people may just not know that there are actual things that you can do to get some help. And thankfully, in my opinion, mental health is is on the rise. There's maybe a little less
Mhm.
stigma, more conversations about it, more honest people recognizing that, we're not just body, we're not just spirit. We've got a real mind that needs help and
Mm.
transformation. And so it's important to work on that too.
Yeah, great answers. All right, guys. So we are going to take a quick break and be back with our next question.
All right.
All right. Welcome back, y'all. We are back from break, and we're going to start off with our third question. So, Brian, what are some of the things that you've utilized in your experiences with either clients or maybe even in the group that you were running to help in these areas?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about it. Emotional management, anger management. So in terms of emotions, how I definitely like to help people and get them to begin to really talk about what it looks like to manage emotions is to understand that we think and we feel and we do. So there are thoughts, there are emotions, and there are actions. I like to think of it as like TEA and kind of a triangle because we will think things and then we will feel things and then we will act. And it usually works in a cycle like that. So something will come into our mind. For example, like I guess I should have thought of this. Let's just say you're thinking like, I feel alone. Nobody likes me. It's just me. In that way, you have these kind of thoughts in your mind. Then what is often going to happen is we'll start to feel alone, that maybe
Mm.
nobody actually cares about me, nobody likes me, or this and that. And then what we'll do is we'll isolate ourselves or we'll just be in that zone or space or feel like, it's kind of hard to reach. And when people don't try as hard, we kind of think again, like, well, see, yeah, people don't care about me, or this is just, like, I guess I'm just alone in life. And then we just feel even deeper. And then it can just create this kind of cycle. And so managing emotions has a lot to do with how we think. And then, of course, what we do and respond to that. Um, so, what I often kind of suggest when it comes to really trying to control what it is we're feeling is actually going the opposite direction.
Hmm.
So, if we naturally think and then we feel and then, we do like thoughts, emotions, and actions, this
Mhm.
TA kind of thing, a lot of times a way to really be in control is to fight to go the opposite direction. So if we have a thought in our mind, it's actually something helpful if we just act on it. Because rather than feeling our way into action, we just allow what it is we believe we should do and we just do it. So this is actually evident of people who are really disciplined, who are able to kind of keep some of those emotions in check. Because if for those who go to the gym and those who work out, actually lifting, especially like some heavy weights and really going for a particular type of goal or build, you got to push past some of those things that you're feeling because you could feel that struggle, you could feel the pain, even just going to the gym. It's like, oh, man, I got to go again. I don't really want that. Your thoughts are, I need to go to the gym. Your feelings are like, man, I don't really want. I want to stay in bed. I want to chill, or I just want to go home. I just want to relax. But if you can allow your thoughts to just go to actions, to not go based on what you feel, but just decide and do it, you can really begin to kind of keep that under check.
Mhm.
Because I mean, really, our emotions will drive us really easily. But if we can decide it in our mind, like, okay, what I've heard is you do a trick. When you decide you need to do something, just go 1, 2, 3, do it. 1, 2, 3, step forward and act. It is a great way to not completely ignore what you're feeling, but to focus on what is probably right. So if you should be confident, you got to give a presentation, you got to stand up and do something, but you're feeling nervous or whatever. Okay, I'm thinking I got to do this. 1, 2, 3, let's go for it. And practice that going into an action. Because a lot of times, if you do that and you actually act on what you should do, now instead of your emotions driving your actions can start to drive your emotions. You act your way into feelings. So what I've seen is that But for those, especially who go to the gym and who do that, they actually start to feel better about it. People who get up and do presentations, they start to feel better doing it because now you're acting your way into a feeling. You're just getting up and you're doing it to create a different feeling inside. It's not as intuitive for someone to do, but if you can train yourself to have these thoughts and beliefs, what you should do, and act on it, you can actually start to shift your emotions. And then your emotions start to tell you, it's actually not so bad. It's cool, it's not so bad. And then you're thinking, I can do that again. It actually kind of worked out. I could get up and sing. I can get up and deal with maybe some of my difficult family members, or I can, whatever it is that may be coming up for a person. I've had to encourage someone to forgive somebody before and to not be so focused on what you're feeling. You realize in your mind, you got to do it. 1, 2, 3, let's go do it. And you actually take the time to apologize, to have that hard conversation. And sooner or later, you start to realize, it wasn't as scary. It wasn't as hard. Or maybe it really was scary and hard, but you got through it. And you recognize you're still alive, and acting your way into a feeling and then allowing your feelings just go into your thoughts, which really kind of looks like allowing yourself to recognize, what am I feeling? And then look at it kind of objectively. When you realize you're feeling something, you can just pause and just take an assessment. Say, okay, wait. What am I honestly feeling right now? Why might I be feeling that? What's going on? Am I okay to feel this way? Well, it's how I feel. And then when you can kind of pause and take a look at it, then you can decide what you want to do with it. Do I want to keep feeling this way? Or maybe do I want to feel something else? So rather than your thinking just driving your emotions are driving your thinking. You're going backwards. You're allowing your emotions to be in check and be able to, look at it critically and then decide what you want to do. Again, some barriers could be really hard to overcome to kind of do this, but I've seen over and over again is by kind of going in reverse, thinking lead to actions, act your way into feelings, let your feelings be subject to your thoughts. Start to be a little easier to manage some of these emotions in some ways. There's a few other things, but hopefully that makes sense what I'm talking about.
No, it's very CBT of you, and I appreciate it. No, that's really great. I actually never thought about that. It just, you helped me in that moment because I was like, wow, that makes sense. Right. What are the other things that you had?
I mean, I'm all about like letters and acronyms and stuff like that because it just seems to help like keep things in mind. So I kind of said the TEA, thoughts, emotions, and actions. You can also think of ABC. It'll be easier. ABC. So when it comes to really kind of figuring out what you're feeling, and this is maybe a little bit leaning more towards anger management, kind of use this strategy as well. So when it comes to wanting to really manage your emotions, especially anger, you can consider ABC. ABC is this. A is some kind of activating event, something that happens. An example I like to use all the time is you are with your buddies, you're standing around, you talking, and somebody steps on your shoe. Somebody steps on your shoe. And let's just say it's them brand new kicks, you got them the newest Jordan 4s. You always rock the ones, whatever you got, you like them and it's cool. And somebody steps on them. So something happens. That's A. Now, what's your response? I would imagine that the average person probably doesn't like their shoes being stepped on. But you probably see how some people might snap. Some people might be like, hey, hey, like you don't see my shoe right here? Like, hey dog, like my shoe dirty now. Like, what, like, why would you do that? May have been an accident, maybe on purpose, but some kind of consequence, something happened. At that moment, there was a decision, a choice, the letter C, to get upset. Yeah, because believe it or not, it was a choice. But you got upset. Okay, something happened. So Stepped on the shoe, that's A. And then what happened? Got upset. Now, I said earlier that for some people, they may not get upset. I mean, let's say it was a stranger stepped on your shoe. That may feel really different than maybe if it was your mother who stepped on your shoe.
Mhm.
It's like you might have a different reaction, but it's kind of interesting because it's the same action. Somebody stepped on the shoe, but why would the response be different? And that's because of something that happens in the middle that's not as obvious to people, because many times it happens that fast, that fast. We believe it goes from A to C. Somebody did this and I responded. Somebody said this to me and I reacted. Somebody cut me off on the freeway and this is how I responded. I got fired. This is how I decided to choose it. That's how the average person could see how life is. But I say A, B, C because there is a B in the middle. So A, there was something that happened. There was a choice in how I responded, but in the middle, there is B. And the B stands for belief. There is a belief about what actually happened. That's what differs between someone who steps on your shoe that's a stranger versus someone who steps on your shoe and that's your mama. And the response is different because of how you perceive it, the belief that you have about it. And that right there is not as clearly identified for some people. What are your belief systems? What do you believe actually happened? When somebody cut you off on the freeway, what did you actually believe happened? Because if you say, well, I get angry when people cut me off, well, what are your beliefs? Your belief is probably that nobody should ever cut you off, ever. Or maybe your belief is that, well, if they cut me off, they're probably in a hurry and probably need to get somewhere for a good reason. And so maybe you don't get mad. Maybe you actually put on your brakes and let them just slide on through and go about your day. The same thing can happen, but if we want to change how we respond to situations, the letter C, then we have to address the B. Because a lot of times we're not going to control what happens to us. But I have seen over and over how the same thing will happen to two different people and they'll be complete different responses, and has everything to do with how they believe. So if you want to try to tackle your emotions, especially anger, you've got to look at what you believe about situations, believe about yourself, believe about things. You change your belief, you can change how you respond.
Speechless. That was good. That was good.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. A, B, C.
Yes.
Yes, easy as 1, 2, 3.
Hey, come
Yeah,
on, Michael Jackson. Sorry.
I love this. No, you're good. I love this so much. I when we were doing anger management in the jails, we taught a similar thing. Not, I feel like if we would have called it ABC, it would have been so much simpler.
Okay.
But
Okay.
there we did basically like the thought process, or the we called it like the behavior process. So
Okay.
the action happens, then you have your thought, and then it's okay, well, what do we believe? And then the reaction, and then the consequence,
Exactly.
and how it goes in the circle. And it's amazing how, I mean, just talking to people, we'd be like, hey, give me a regular one. And it's like, okay, well, somebody rolled their eyes at me, or somebody said something about me, and the beliefs that people will list out about the situation, about themselves, you would have never thought to connect. But they're like, oh, she rolled her eyes at me, she thinks I'm dumb, she thinks I'm never going to amount to anything, and all of these core beliefs are just like echoing. So crazy.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Because there's different ways to perceive what's happening. You can have different beliefs. So sometimes it's just a matter of, well, is there another possible reason that this event happened? Is there another way to look at it? Is there another way? Maybe it
Right.
could be something else. And you could be surprised that, like, oh, maybe there is another reason why. And we act based on our beliefs. And so we've got to know what we believe, and then we can shift and change that. Yeah. Yeah. So I've seen that with people when it comes to emotions and anger, looking at ABC. Yeah. Yeah.
So good.
And then, of course, particularly with anger, we talked about a little bit earlier in this podcast, but recognizing that anger is a secondary emotion.
Yes.
So
Let them know.
we have primary emotions, things that are instinctive to us. Okay. We get happy, we get sad. These are things that definitely are natural for us. But anger, we may get upset, we may get bothered by something, sure. But when it comes to anger, it is a secondary. And when I say secondary, it's because there are emotions underneath it that are fueling that anger. And just like the belief that for those who may like honestly have some kind of anger problem, like they get angry real fast, 0 to 100, like these people, maybe it's you, but the ones who it's like I get angry, and maybe it's not about the entire world, but maybe there's something in particular where you just get angry really quickly. Well, pretty much every time anger is secondary and there's an emotion behind it. So when we talk about managing anger management, we got to look at what might be fueling the anger, what's behind it. Now, in my experience, there could be a dozen different emotions that actually need to kind of be looked at that's fueling the anger. In my experience, there's kind of two that really seem to be the biggest culprits, almost the majority of the time, that is usually behind the anger. So someone says, I get angry, or something always triggers them. There's a good chance that underneath the anger, it's one of these two, that it's either fear or hurt. It's almost always fear or hurt. Get angry about something, you know, it's a good chance that you're either really afraid of what actually may come or something that happens or something that's you think is going to be there, or you really may be hurt by something that hasn't been resolved. But fear and hurt, those are some serious emotions. That's some vulnerable emotions. So it's much easier to just get angry. Definitely much easier to just be angry because anger is powerful. Anger can get you what you want. Anger can scare other people down. So, it's like for some people who just naturally get angry, it's worked for them. It's worked for them. You want to start managing some of that anger, you've got to stop and ask yourself, what might be fueling this? And there's a good chance it could be fear or hurt. And that means you've got to stay at the fear or the hurt. There's been times my wife has gotten me a little angry, just a little bit. I'm gonna keep it on her. Oh Lord, help me. Got angry, but I quickly recognized, because I mean, if there's anybody who should understand anger, is someone who's taught it for a year and and likes it. So ladies, I will tell you the truth that I will quickly work on myself, because I will be like, okay, wait, hold on, I'm angry. What is it? Is it fear or is it hurt? I'm like, I'm not afraid or anything, but I am hurt. I am hurt.
Mm.
Would she do that? Why would she say that? And I recognize if I want to solve myself or solve the problem and not be angry, I just let myself be in the hurt. Just let myself just be in it. Just be in it. And then it's heavy, it's hard, I'd be nervous sharing that with somebody else. But if I could deal with the hurt, it stops from getting to the secondary emotion. Because now I'm dealing with this, really dealing with that. So sometimes it's fear, especially if you're intimidated, if people are attacking you, bullying you, if you're feeling like, you're being pushed down, you could be afraid of what people think and perceive. And so for some people, rather than feel like they're afraid, they'll just be angry. That's a real thing. And then of course, for some people, they're just genuinely hurt, especially males. And guys showing that they're hurt is not attractive. That's not something guys even want to talk about. So you're kind of left to yourself to deal with it. But we can break down some of these barriers. Will prevent us getting angry. And for those who I met in the group therapy session, the anger who actually hurt people and put people in hospitals and taking lives, I mean, just staying at the hurt or the fear or whatever the emotion is, can really help some people out, even yourself.
Yeah, which I think it probably begs the question of like, and we could probably do a whole nother episode on this, is like, what stops people from sitting with their emotions? I know a lot of the times the feeling of being overwhelmed by hurt or being overwhelmed by fear actually intimidates people to just not sit with it and just access the anger real quicker because it's easier to sit with, which is something that I've noticed is it's difficult sometimes, particularly also in males, to sit with big emotions like that.
Mhm,
So
mhm, mhm. No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. I
It is
think another thing for me is like also I think it's never really taught.
mm,
Like, for example, when girls are hurt, like if you look, especially not so much now, but especially in the eras when we were growing up and before them, when girls are hurt, we cry. When boys are hurt, they hurt back. So
mm,
there has definitely
mm,
been this taught and
mm.
cycle thing of like, especially for men. I remember working in the jails, they're just like tap into my emotions, like tap into sadness. What is that? Because every time I think of something that makes me sad, it makes me angry because that's how we've been programmed, and not only by our parents but by society. Like if you see a guy crying over something, you're saying he's a wimp, he's all of these crazy things because he's not going the angry route of being sad but actually tapping into it, seeing what's wrong with me, and then moving on from there. And society has had such a big thing of like this uh macho, like it's not acceptable to cry but it's acceptable to be angry. And so so much times the sadness has just been implemented in there, and we're seeing a lot of generations, which is so cool, being able to see men kind of tap into this area of what does it look like not only to necessarily be sad but feel it, process it, and move forward with it without the hitting everybody, throwing people, bullying tastic that we're used to seeing.
mm-hmm,
So true. It's so true because, there's usually a perceived idea that emotions and feeling them, that's a powerlessness. And
mm,
when you get angry, I mean, for some people who get so angry and they black out or, they see red or whatever you want to call it, they can really not just do damage, but have power.
Mm-hmm.
mm,
Hurt, there's a good chance you may feel powerless or less powerful. And then the anger itself can give some of that back, or at least show people that you won't take no for an answer, or you're not going to be punked, or you're not going to be pushed down, or something like that. When on the contrary, someone who can be a master of their emotions, who can do the work, which maybe you're right, Ali, there's definitely worth talking about what
mm-hmm,
that looks like,
mm-hmm,
but who can actually do the work and to use their emotions and manage it and control it, not ignore it, not whatever, but to harness that to feel what they decide and what they do and all of that. That person is someone who is through and through completely clear, who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and can be the most effective and most powerful.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Brian, were there any more tools that you wanted to mention, or were those the two main ones?
Mm, I suppose
All three.
really the kind of three would be looking at how we think and how influence our emotions and how we act, and kind of trying to beat the system and go backwards.
Mm-hmm,
And also looking at things in an ABC format, thinking what is happening, what am I deciding, but what am I believing about it, and then kind of
mm-hmm,
change that. And then finally recognizing that when it comes to anger, that's not a primary thing. That's being fueled by something pretty much every time. So
mm-hmm.
taking a look at that, doing an inventory, doing some self-reflection, uh, that usually helps begin the anger management process.
Yep. One thing that just came to mind as you mentioned the last one, I mean, it's actually a little activity that I do with some of my clients that we're working through anger management is anger warning signs. So that's something that people typically don't pay mind to, but your body will tell you before your mind will, how you're feeling. And so being mindful to what's going on in your body, like do you notice your temperature changes, or do you notice you start to shake, your voice, modulates? Those things are all warning signs that your emotions are starting to elevate.
That's good.
So that's
That's
one
good.
thing I wanted to mention.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
You're right.
So the big old question, and I can't wait for this response. Um, Do you believe that there are any benefits or barriers as Christians or in the Christian community when it comes to anger or just
Yeah.
emotions in general?
Yeah. there has been an ongoing debate for a long time, and I maybe classify as kind of a barrier to when it comes to managing emotions, is even just recognizing um, the fact that we are tripart beings.
Mhm.
We don't have spirits. We are a spirit. This is us. When we die, our bodies, this outer layer, this skin bag, this goes into the ground with our
Mhm.
and then but our spirits, who we actually are, that's what lives on forever. That's is determined on deciding how we live this life, the decisions we make, or we choose to follow Christ or not, like that affects that. But we are tripart beings. We have this body, we are a spirit, but we have a mind. And so if we want to look at the Bible talks about how in Romans that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. But, Paul was, who wrote that, was talking to Christians. And so
Mhm.
how is it that as a Christian, someone who says yes to God, yes to Jesus, and accepts him, has to have their mind renewed? What is that?
Come on. Come
You know,
on.
it really comes down to recognizing that when you're saved, the work finally begins.
Mm.
Some Christian
Oof.
circles use the word sanctification. So we are
Mm.
being sanctified. We are getting purified. We're getting more and more like Christ.
Mm.
Yeah.
And of course, we have been sanctified, but we are still being sanctified in the process. So
Mhm.
for Christians, we must recognize that being saved is not the end of our growth. It's not the end of what
Yes.
God wants to do.
Mm.
And not only that, but we have to also recognize that this takes work. So God wants to do something in our minds. God wants to do something in our hearts.
Mhm.
Now, if you ask me, okay, this is kind of more me, but
Mhm.
the Bible often talks about our heart. In
Mm.
Jeremiah, it talks about that the heart is deceitful and wicked. Who can really know this? And hope deferred makes the heart sick. There's verses that Jesus talks about, or Jesus says that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Um,
Yep.
so it could be a little confusing for the average Christian. Like, okay, we've got the body, we got the spirit, we got the soul, we got the mind, we got the heart. What is happening?
Mhm.
And I bring this up because if we can understand how we are as tripart beings, we can better understand what it means to look at our emotions and how we deal with that. So I've really come to understand that we have a body, we are a spirit, and we have our mind. This is our soul. This is our mind, our will, and our emotions. Our subconscious really is more of our heart. And so when it comes to who
Mm.
we really are and those emotions, we have to work on this here. Now, our minds are affected by what we see, what we hear, what we're doing, our senses all day. And it's very easy for our mind to receiving all kind of junk, depending on what we're watching, what we're hearing. And of course, that can affect us, as far as our spiritual growth, because we are constantly at war. Our flesh, what we're instinctively wanting, what our mind wants, versus what our spirit really, really is craving. We have to be led by the spirit. We have to live by the spirit, do the things that grow that way, and
Mm.
be mindful of what's happening in our mind and be keeping our mind in subjection. And so when it comes to barriers, we have to recognize that our soul is a real place. The enemy likes to attack us here. And so we've got to allow ourselves to be emotionally prepared for just whatever it is that may come. But if our mind is not renewed, if we're not working on this, if we're not allowing ourselves to do the work and to grow, then we can be so easily swayed by the enemy. We can allow our emotions to override what the Bible says, what we
Yeah.
believe God is telling us. And then now it's like, well, this is just how I feel. This
Mm.
is just what I think is right. When what God may be saying, what God may be doing, may be
Mm.
different than what we feel.
Mm.
Mm.
I think if there's any person in the Bible that we can really understand about emotional management, that is Jesus himself.
Yep.
Mhm.
If he's supposed to be our example and our way of living, my God, uh, I look at what Jesus went through and endured, um, even just to the end of all the disciples that he had and the 12 that were around him and his three closest ones. And when it really got rough and he's on that cross, everybody just fled and departed. There's barely anybody who was there for him. I mean, talk about rejection, talk about abandonment, talk about just everything you've done and helped and supported, all the healings and miracles. Man. Now, if anybody understands the thoughts to actions, the TEA, like choosing, like, what am I deciding to do and just doing it, that would be Christ himself, because man, he knew what was right. He knew what his purpose was. And so what's a benefit as a believer is that we have that example. We have Christ. We can understand that, you know, his word tells us over and over that he's not going to leave us. He's not going to forsake us. So if it doesn't make sense in our mind, if we feel some kind of way, but the word says differently, then we know that we can just trust the word and let that transform our minds and not be led by what it is we're feeling. Because if we're led by our feelings in this life, I'm pretty sure that we will end up alone. We will end up thinking that we deserve more, because, you know, emotions will lead to what we really, really want. But when it comes to the Christian, when it comes to living your life for Christ, it's not about what it is we want. It's about what Christ wants. To delight ourselves in the Lord. He gives us the desires of our hearts, not what we've been craving or what we really want, but he actually changes our desires. It's his desires he puts in our hearts, our subconscious mind, the part of our minds that really drive behavior and we don't even know, like, why we do what we do. That part that's really nebulous, that's under the water of the iceberg, you know, the part that's, you know, really deep of history and emotions and things. That's the part that I believe that God wants to tap into and really change, that we give ourselves away to. And so as Christians, this life isn't easy, but I think it's easier than being apart from God, because you know, with God we can do all things. We can really trust him and his word, and not go by what we see, but just to go by faith.
That's so good. He preached a whole sermon, y'all. I don't know if you caught it, but he preached a
I
whole
can't
sermon.
help it. I can't help it. Oh man.
No, that wasn't a knock. That was just, I hope you caught it.
Absolutely.
Yes, the heart being the subconscious, that was great. But also I think it's very true in that the Bible also says, you know, guard your heart, right? And I think that's what he's speaking to. He's like, hey, guard your heart, because it's from what's in, you know, what people don't know that is going to drive what you're going to do for me, right? And understanding that just in an emotional and management like arena, it's saying like, be aware of these things, but don't let these things, you know, overcome you, because I have overcome these things. It's, even though I just paraphrased the Bible scripture, but that's kind of how I see it, and I think that was wonderfully put, Brian, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm totally with that. You know, the Bible does talk about emotions a lot, and God gave us emotions, so it isn't something that we should be thinking is wrong, or think like, okay, God, why do I feel this way? Well, it's, you know, we are natural, like we're still people, you know. But there is a solution. There is help, and if not for the Bible itself, God uses counselors, God uses therapists, God uses social workers, God uses people that do their best to understand how the brain works and the mind, even help with day-to-day things. So you know, there are resources. There definitely are.
Say that last part again. What did God create?
You know,
Shameless
people
plug.
will say, well, you know, I don't know about shrinks. I don't know about all that, you know, but you'll go to a doctor, you'll go to a physician, you'll go to you know, you'll go to a surgeon if you really need some help on your physical body. You know, you feel some kind of spiritual attack. You say, where's the pastor? Where's the pastor? Let me text, let me get on the call, let me get to church. So going through it mentally, your mental health, you know, what's the difference? Has God not also created individuals to help with the mental health? That's what I think.
Yes, I'm right there on board with you, and I share that same sentiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent in believing that, God created all things, of course, but there's always a practical side and a faith side. And I think this is just a perfect conversation, an example of how those things can merge and how we can learn to exercise our faith through our actions
Mm.
and doing things the Bible says, such as self-discipline, by learning to manage things like our emotions and anger. So, such good stuff, such good stuff. We're going to take one more break and we're going to hop back on for final thoughts and wrap up. All right.
Okay.
Thank you for sticking around, y'all.
Hi, everybody. So we're back. I hope it gave you a few seconds. It's not a super long break, just to digest everything that was just said because I'm over here like in my brain.
Mm.
The second part where you're talking about the heart was so good. I've
Mhm.
never actually taken like a deep dive into that aspect. So even thinking about that for me was like fireworks going off in my brain. But the first part, when you were talking about renewing the mind, I just talked to this to Allie like on Monday.
Mhm.
It's one of my favorite things to like, I don't know if push is the right word, but to get Christians to think about, because I think one of the things that you hit on that's like so prevalent is just that a lot of times, especially as Christians, we go and get prayed for and just think that that's it, and that like everything else from there should be smooth sailing. And I think one of the interesting things, or one of the things that I always put about, is that when God does talk about renewing the mind, what that basically means is he will break, or the way I started off is that there are several of studies that show that any habit you create, whether it's a new habit, past habit, creates a new groove in your brain. So that's why you hear people say that they feel like they're on autopilot when they do things, or they've always done it without thinking. It's because that's the groove that their brain has put in. So that's just the habit that they have. And so oftentimes, especially when whatever the habit is, or if it's things like depression, things like that, we often think that if we go to God and pray about it, that he's going to break that change, which he does, but that's it. And like, we don't have to do anything. We can walk out a happy camper, and
Mm.
then something happens and we fall right back into that groove. And people, I think oftentimes throw out the space where like this is the work, like this is the renewing of your mind, this is the seeing a therapist, getting those anger management classes, getting those coping skills to create new grooves. So even though they don't hold power over us as Christians anymore, it's still easy to fall back into that same pattern because that's how our brain has been wired. So until we renew it, is it the fact that we put in the work, meet with therapists, meet with people who help us in those areas to create the new grooves to really push us to have that renewed mind, to have,
Mm.
so not only doesn't have power over us now, but now we're not falling back into the same groove because our minds are renewed. And so when you said that, I wanted to throw my whole computer across the room because I was so excited.
Right. That's it. That's it. That's literally it right there.
Yeah.
Mhm. She
That's it.
gets it.
Got to do the work.
Gets it. You
Work.
got to do the work because faith without works is
Yeah.
dead. Is dead, y'all. Is dead.
Hmm.
She also, I didn't mention it, but she also says a really profound, and she's mentioned it in other episodes, but that, oh, I don't want to butcher it. Go ahead and say it, A, with the debris.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So I like to say my little tagline is that God
Okay.
God will break all the chains, but it's our job to clean up the debris. So meaning that like if depression is your chain, he'll break it, but the debris is cleaning up, putting in those coping skills, putting in that safety plan if that's what you need, putting in the things, sweeping up the debris so the evidence isn't still lingering, right? There's no chains, but there's a bunch of debris laying around. It's a lot easy to think, to believe, to act as if it still has the same hold over you.
Yeah. 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 That's probably it right there. Cleaning
Yeah.
up after that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Stepping forth. Yeah.
Mm,
Which, it's not easy, but when there is freedom, there is an expectation that we will walk in that freedom and
Mm-hmm.
choose differently and live differently and decide differently. When you shared that, it reminded me of the story of the woman who was caught in the act of adultery and brought
Mm-hmm.
before Jesus. And then, of course, all the Pharisees and the Sadducees were like, what should we do? your word, the Old Testament says the stoner, what should we do? And, Jesus doesn't respond. But then eventually he's like, okay, the one who's without sin, you go ahead and cast the first stone. But then they all recognize that, they've all sinned before. And then Jesus is like, where are your accusers, woman? And she's like, well, I guess they're gone. And he's like, I don't condemn you either.
Mm.
Breaks her from, that. Jesus saying, look, it's gone, breaking that. But it doesn't end there. It says, go and sin no more.
Yeah.
Now there's the action that she needs to take so that she does not go back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Cleaning up those pieces of all those chains that he just broke. Ayana, love it.
Man.
Love it.
It's so good.
That's it.
Yes. So good, such good information. And even for those of our listeners that may not be believers, well, we can get y'all saved. Just kidding. Kind of, not really. But just understanding that there's power and freedom in coping and learning to manage and do things differently. Like, you just because you've grew up the angry kid or you're the emotional one, I think this episode really just speaks to the fact that you can change, and it's okay to change, and it's okay to seek help to get the skills to do the changing and to make your life easier. That's definitely something that I felt needed to be said. And then the last thing that you mentioned about cleaning up the debris and being free, I was reminded of another scripture that I don't know exactly, but it's something that's been ringing in my own mind personally. It's just like that once you're free, you're no longer bound, right? And so the bondage, you don't have to carry that anymore. And so understanding that when you do things like go to therapy and do the work and make the changes, like, don't let the enemy come back in and make you feel guilty or shameful or fearful or hurt about things that you've already received freedom from. If you're doing the work, you're managing your anger, managing your emotions, give yourself that credit. I felt like that needed to be said. So
Yeah.
just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah. Because mental health, like in terms of mental growth, I should say, it's very obvious. It is. But, if you can take inventory and look back maybe 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, where you were, where you are now, and you can see growth, you can see the change, you can see you really trying to manage emotions, or maybe what used to get you doesn't quite get you anymore. That's worth celebrating. That's definitely worth acknowledging, because you're doing the work, you're on the right path.
So, any final thoughts, Brian, besides the one you just shared?
Any last thoughts? My understanding, not someone who is a Christian, but there is a woman who wrote this book, and is actually kind of popular in the field of psychology, mental health, and emotional health, and things like that. She talks a lot about emotions, a lot about emotions. I'm glad you mentioned about the final thoughts, because this definitely came to mind. Her name is Brene Brown, and she's got a lot of things on YouTube. Y'all are smiling. Y'all know what I'm talking about here. I got a chance to dive a little bit into her stuff, but she has a book called Atlas of the Heart. And that book itself has really just blown my mind on how she is really able to splice some of these emotions and really get clarity on understanding them and differentiating them. I like to liken emotions to shades of colors. Because you go to Home Depot, you go to Lowe's, you go to Sherwin-Williams or whatever, you go to their if you're going to paint something, you go to the swatches, you'll see all kind of colors. The average guy, they'll see red, blue, green, yellow, brown, whatever. But you start looking at all these different shades, you could really kind of liken a lot of emotions to that too. So some emotions are really kind of sneaky, and also other secondary emotions do exist other than anger. So it would be really good if anybody listening, if you're really curious about just grasping emotions and maybe a little bit more, the lady Brene Brown, she's done a lot of work. She's on YouTube and everywhere. And she has that book, Atlas of the Heart. I definitely recommend that. She speaks with a little color and language in her words. So be mindful of that. She's very raw and real, but I do think there's definitely some gems there.
Go ahead, A.
Sorry, we're laughing because Brene Brown is literally my Oprah.
Yeah, you're Oprah.
I
You
think
know, you know.
she is a genius when it comes to emotions, and breaking them down is literally so good. So when you were like, there's this lady, I was like, please say Brene Brown because I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
her.
You
She's
had the
so
brown
good.
Kool-Aid. Yeah,
Man.
right. Yeah. No, yeah, she's really good. I probably got to her a little late in the game. I hadn't heard about her until maybe 2021 or so. 20,
Mm.
somewhere about there. Kind of learned about her. Yeah.
Just a tad late. Just a little bit.
Sadly. Yeah.
It's okay. I'm always late to the game, so
It's good.
I get it.
Actually, I think I sure do. I sure do.
He has it.
Here, I got a bunch of books everywhere, but this
It's
book,
pretty
Yes.
too. It's such a pretty
It's
cover.
beautiful.
keep it close. Atlas of the Heart. Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, so I'll put that in the comment section or description
Absolutely.
as a resource for y'all for sure. Hey, any last thoughts for you?
Yes, I just want to say, or just heighten on, I think this episode is so good about just diving in. Two things that I'll say. One, again, read the book, get into an anger management class. Even if you feel like you don't have anger, get in there to understand and put to use the things that we're talking about. Two is empathy. If you feel like you're somebody who doesn't struggle with this area, or you feel like you've done a lot better, I hope that this podcast just brings you a moment to have empathy for those, to understand that these aren't just people who are acting crazy or people who are can't control their anger, that there's something else going on there. To be more empathetic towards children. Children are dealing with some of the same things that we are, and we're so quick to say quit having a tantrum when they literally are just can't process. So my biggest thing is, if you're not struggling with any of these things, take a class and have some empathy.
Mm.
So good. Well, thank you, Brian, for coming on, Pastor Brian, for coming on and preaching to us. You enlightened me. I know you enlightened Day, and you shared so much wisdom and knowledge in this area. Things that I didn't even really think about, like, thinking and then acting. Never thought about doing it backwards. That was definitely a helpful nugget. And just thank you so much for just taking your time. We know you got your baby and your wife to tend to, and you took time out of your evening to speak to us on this topic. And we are very grateful for the time that you've given us, and just the knowledge that you shared today. Honestly, I'm gonna go back and listen to this. I'm gonna listen to it multiple times.
Sure. Yeah.
Not an angry person, but can definitely just use the information and use the reminder. So thank you so much for coming on today.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And I honestly am grateful for even the opportunity. And you guys invited me on. I was definitely encouraged by what you guys are doing, and really just getting more mental health awareness and tools and resources and tips out there. And that's what it's about. And you two are quality women, quality people helpers in this people helping business. And we need that. We need that. So we need this podcast. We need times like this. We need you guys. So, I mean, yeah, thank you.
So kind, so sweet. If you don't know, just a fun fact about me, words of affirmation is like my top love language. So I'm just sitting over here like, ew. But no, jokes aside,
Yeah.
thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do our outro, eh?
Yes, well, thanks, Brian, for coming on. Thank you to all of our listeners for taking your time out. Make sure you share it with somebody that you know that you would like to. Let us know how much you loved it. You can find us, of course, on Instagram at Seeds to Healing. If you have any topics, any guests you would like to come on, please go ahead and mention it there. And if you tally marked how many times we said angry, also let us know there. Bye, everybody. Have a great time. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you guys so much for joining today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed recording it. We are going to be dropping episodes every other Monday, so tune in.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much. If you'd like to follow us, you can follow us on Instagram at Seeds to Healing. And also go ahead and jump over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel, Seeds to Healing, as well.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.